What is up, guys? Welcome back to the YouTube education channel. I apologize for the hiatus. I got unwell. I don't know what with. It was COVID-like symptoms. I don't know if it was COVID. I didn't bother testing, but I've been a write-off for the last few weeks. So I know a lot of you have been messaging and asking and commenting when is the YouTube back up and running. It's back up and running from now, just kind of as the usual schedule before. When I kind of get unwell like that, I still have a lot of work that is necessary, and work that is non-negotiable is the phrase I was looking for. So that takes priority. So sadly this was put on the back burner, which I apologise for, but we're back running. So today's video is on the density day itself, following on from the 5-day split. So the density day training setup is my 5-day favoured split that I went through in that previous density day video. But I said to you I was going to give you a specific day that then covered density day itself, because there's going to be some slight kind of nuances to how you set this day up. But the goal of the day is basically to get a really thick back and really crazy legs. And that's how the split is set up in terms of the week. That's why it's called a density day. I believe someone that has crazy density is someone that has an unbelievable amount of thickness on their back, where you, even with a t-shirt on, you're like, holy shit, that guy's back is crazy. And then again, same with their legs. Their legs are so thick that you're like, that's a really dense physique. That was always a look that I hugely aspired to. I wanted to have just so much nutty density on my back, that then this split kind of really allowed me to get there. So how does this day itself look? Well, when we consider what we've already done through the week, we've done a chest focused push session on a Monday. We've then done a leg session on a Tuesday that doesn't have neither quad nor ham focus. It's kind of balanced. Then we would have a non-lower back loading pull session on a Wednesday. So that's a pretty easy session. Then resting on a Thursday, then a shoulder focused push session on a Friday. And then we know that in this session that we've got to hit some legs and we've got to hit some back. So the order of which you select your exercises will be kind of dependent upon your weaknesses, but realistically, I believe the first movement that you should be coming in and hitting as a priority is your deadlift variation. Now that could just be a conventional deadlift, but as I previously mentioned in a lot of content, that is not your most optimal choice for hypertrophy. Simply from a investment to fatigue ratio perspective, that it will take a lot of effort from you, and what it returns is quite minimal in terms of hypertrophy response. So I believe a stiff leg is a better choice, but this split really lends itself to building just a massive deadlift, which again is fun. It's a great goal, and certainly if you do get your deadlift high enough, it's going to show in your physique. But I am extremely confident that if you build a good stiff leg, it's going to show in your physique sooner, and it's not going to take away from your fatigue across the week in quite the same level that just a conventional deadlift will. So let's say we start with a stiff leg. We've washed that off. Now my next movement would then be some kind of bent over row variation. I did like doing both movements, and that's simply because the goal is to just really, really overwhelm the thickness aspect. Now this might be too much for some to recover from. So take this with a pinch of salt, whether then you just do the stiff leg. But if your stiff leg's going great and your lower back fatigue isn't too crazy, you would then do a bent over row variation. Now, after that, I would typically do some kind of lat movement. Because I've done those two movements to start that do bring in a lot of upper back, I don't then do an upper back isolated movement. So I wouldn't do like a chest supported T-bar or a seated cable row. I would then move on to a lat movement, because you aren't going to get very much lat recruitment in those movements that you've already done. So then it would be whatever your preference is when it comes to lat movements. Just remember that the lat will still be pretty fresh. So using a movement that biases the short is still going to be advantageous, just because we always want to do that whilst we do have the oomph there to do it. So a single armed pull down, for example, would be ideal. Now, that's our back work boxed off. Now, I would then kind of like to replicate how I would do some aspects of the leg session. So I would then do a hamstring curl, and then it would either be a squat or a leg press variation. And then, depending on your weaknesses of your legs, you would then pick a quad isolation movement, another hamstring movement, or a glute movement. We've covered a lot of glute ham in the pull already, so that doesn't necessarily need to be hit specifically again when you've done a hamstring curl. So most people are probably going to benefit from actually finishing off with a leg extension. But for some of you that do have really dominant quads, then quite obviously more glute ham work at the end. If you have big glutes but underdeveloped hams, then specifically focus on another hamstring curl. Whereas if both of them are weak, then you could look at the hyperextension. So then when we look at that session as a whole, if we've got a pull at the beginning and then we've got a row second and we're finishing with a hyper, that is tons of posterior chain work. And if you get really good at those things, it's going to show so much in your physique. I really believe it showed in mine. Like, I was never a great on-stage bodybuilder because I loved the training way more than I loved the competing. I didn't love competing. I never cared. But because of the way that I trained, I was quite hard to beat when we turned around. And that was in all the shows I did. And that could be the same for you, regardless of the level you compete at, if you take that approach and that mentality. Shows are mostly won from behind still, because it really sets you aside in terms of, whoa, that looks insane. Like when James turns around, it's crazy because he's so dense. He's so dense. Even James's pictures don't even show how dense he is. You've got to see it in person. When James turns around, it's just slabs of muscle hanging off him. And this setup will certainly lend itself to you moving towards that kind of look. So that's our 5-day split density day approach, where the goal is to get a really crazy thick back and really crazy thick legs. So any questions on that particular setup for the day, please ask. And of course, if you have any other questions in general, ask, and I'm here to help. Thanks, guys.